your world. Let me see your face. Carry me away. Carry me away, lift me from this place, ease my burdens, Lord. Take me to your world, let me see your face, carry me away. Carry me away, lift me from this place, ease my burdens, Lord. Take me to your world, let me see your face, carry me away.
Hello and welcome to another SDAQ&A Season 4, Episode 16. My very special guest today is Gillian Ford. How are you, Gillian?
A bit frantic after half an hour of fiddling around.
It's annoying, isn't it? Technology. It seems like it's there to just haunt us.
I've got two computers here, a new one and an old one, two desks, and I have to move one desk back to get into the front one. Oh,
I thought it was funny that you...
Anyway, here we are, and
Here
it
we
looks as
are.
though nothing has happened. Now, tell me about my volume, because I've turned it down for that music. Now, this will be
Terrible
loud.
rock and roll.
Well, it's for the neighbours and the dogs.
Turn it up a little bit.
Oh, it's fully up now.
Oh, that's good. No, we can hear you.
Okay.
Welcome everyone that I'm tongue-tied. Welcome those that are joining us. Got quite a few people, which is nice. We're live on YouTube and Facebook. Now, what we're doing today, which I think is very exciting, and I've been very much looking forward to it, is we're going to be reading letters to and from Des, leading up to Glacier View and post-Glacier View. And I'm wanting to create this as a resource where we read the whole letter. I'll be reading the letter to Des, and you'll be reading the letters from Des back to that person. We'll give a bit of commentary after we've read each letter. But what I'm trying to do that's a little bit different is, instead of people just presenting highlights or summaries or an analysis of something, I want to read the whole thing. So some of the letters are long, some of them are short, but we're creating a resource here for future generations to enjoy and to really get to know the big picture of what was going on behind the scenes in many ways. So I'll get you to share your thoughts on that idea in a second while I'm getting the first letter ready, which is from Eric Magnuson to Des Ford, February the 21st, 1977. Like some quick thoughts before we start, Gillian?
Well, we won't get through these. There's about 30 pages of stuff that go over.
We'll divide this into several parts. This is part one of this series. Okay, well, I think we're ready to go. I think we've got enough people watching us, and we'll make a start. So perhaps create a little bit of a setting for us before I read this first one, and tell us what is the background there. The letterhead is Avondale College. Eric Magnuson was the president of Avondale at the time. The date is February 21, 1977. What was going on? Where were you guys? What was the reason for the writing of the letter?
Well, this is February 1977, and in July, we were on our way to PUC. So this is the planning stage earlier in the year, and Eric has written a summary of what's going to happen. We're going to come back in 2 years. I don't want to say any more, but this, along with this, Des only wanted to go for 2 years, and part of his going was the promise that he would come back to Avondale as head of the Bible department. Maybe he wasn't reasonable to ask for that, but he did, and he was promised. I heard Duncan Eva in our house say this, although he later forgot. And Des said he also saw Keith Parmenter, and he promised the same. So this is the ratification from Eric of what was supposed to happen.
And one last thing, we will be posting these as in a PDF format in the comments on our Facebook group, which is a private group. If you're watching this on YouTube, go and check out the links below, join our Facebook group, and the actual PDFs of this will be shared in the comments there. Okay, let's begin. As I said, I'll be reading, and Gillian will be doing the responses. So, dear Des, at the meeting of the college board held on February 17, it was voted to accept the proposal from Pacific Union College that you serve as a lecturer on the exchange plan for 2 academic years as from July 1977. PUC have made this proposal on the understanding that you are re-employed in this division at the end of the 2-year period, and to this we are happy to accede. We propose to retain your name in our calendar as head of the Department of Theology and to appoint an acting head to replace you for the 2-year period. The question of replacement will be taken up at the meeting of the board on March 16. The actual date that PUC will begin to pay you will depend on negotiation with them, but I'm proposing that this be mid-July, since this will be a suitable date for you to return to our service in 1979. All of this is a poor show for Avondale, but it is a good thing for PUC, California, and America. Even if the inhabitants of the North American continent prove as resistant to your exhortations of jogging as do we Australians, they have still much to gain. Yours sincerely, God bless you, Des. Yours sincerely, Eric Magnuson, President. Any thoughts there before you read the reply?
My video isn't working my end, so I'm just talking at the screen.
Yes. So you can't see me?
This is the documentary evidence that this was the understanding that Des had. Promises of 2 leaders, one a vice president from the General Conference, although, as I say, he later forgot, and one from the division president, and then Eric writes it down. So we've got the evidence that this was so. And a couple of letters later, we don't have to dwell on this, we're going to see where this is reversed. And Des is not going back to Avondale, and he's not consulted about it. And the rumours about him are just taken as fact. So I think that's all we need to say about that one.
Just tell me the reply that we're about to hear now. What's the date? I'm just going to put it up on our screen.
Well, this isn't a reply, but it's June the 12th, 1978. It's page 2 on your list. Some of these.
Are you reading Des's reply to that, or is this now me?
No,
okay,
this is me.
Okay, so this is me.
You are impersonating Keith Parmenter.
And you'll be reading some of Des's replies though,
Right.
but there's no reply to that letter, is that right?
No, I've just put in Keith's. Oh, yes, there is. Hang on a minute. Hang on a minute while I sort this
That's
out.
all right.
Okay, there's an
So-
interim letter that I put in for another reason, but you're going to be reading a lot. I'm going to be sitting here having a very nice time.
Okay, but
You're reading a letter from Keith Parmenter written in June the 12th, and then you're
Right.
going to read a letter from Keith Parmenter,
okay,
October the 30th, where he reverses
yes,
Eric's.
yeah.
But I put everything in date order. That's what historians do.
I like it. That's what I want. But I also was hoping we were going to get some. Have we got some of Des' replies to these letters?
Yes, the October one.
Good. So they'll come later. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So I'm just putting up the date for this one so that it's on the screen as we read it.
So it's you're going to read two of Parmenter's letters, and I'm going to read two of Des's replies.
Yes. Good. Just double checking all of that. So this is. Sorry, I just edit. We're having to go on the fly because I can't add this stuff beforehand because I've only got one box to do it. So apologies there, everyone. But this is now Keith Parmenter to Des, June 12, 1978. And this is from the Office of the President, Australasian Division of the Seventh Adventist Church.
As a comment,
Wahroonga there. Yep.
As a comment, you'll see there's a lot of they're chatty letters. They're friendly. Nothing wrong with that. What's wrong is what's going on behind the scenes at different times. So a lot of it won't be directly pertinent. But anyway, go ahead.
Yes, here we go. And okay. And this is when you were in Pacific Union College by now. And just to give a bit of location information. Okay. Dear Des, thank you for your good letter of May 12. I'm sorry that I have not been in a position to reply until now. Think you are probably aware that May is a very busy month for us with mid-year meetings, etc. We've just completed the pre-council and mid-year meetings of the division and the two home field unions. Actually, I have just returned after 8 days of meetings in the Western Pacific Union Mission and the Papua New Guinea Union Mission. I guess you folk over at PUC are beginning to enjoy spring weather. We commenced our winter here this month with cold, wet, windy weather. However, don't think we have that much to complain about as far as weather is concerned in most of the Australian continent. Pastor George Vanderman and his team have just been through our territory and conducted 14 Revelation seminars. In all, I understand approximately 5,000 people attended these seminars, and more than 50% of them would have been non-Adventists. The local church pastors are now conducting the seminars on a weekly basis, and the prospects are very good. More and more of our local church pastors are taking hold of the seminar type program with good success. I just had a letter from Dr. Ian Gillian the other day, and the type of program that he is conducting in the Hughesdale area has produced more interests than he and his church can care for. He is making an urgent appeal for an extra worker to support him. Dr. Tom Ludoisi is also working on a program that will involve the hospital, the local church and conference, and the Trans-Tasman Union. At the mid-year meetings, we set up a committee that might involve all these organisations in a follow-up program of interests that are developed at our Sydney Adventist Hospital. Tom is quite enthusiastic about the plan. It is nice to see these boys returning from Andrews University with the fire of evangelism still burning brightly in their souls. Des, in the second paragraph of your letter, you referred to material produced by Llewellyn Jones and evidently printed by the Burnside Press that had recently arrived in North America. You were not the first one to mention the circulation of this material. However, as far as we can ascertain, Lou Jones is no way responsible for its circulation. When Brother Jorgensen and I first heard that this material was being distributed, I suggested that Alf get in touch with Lou to see if he had any part in it. And Alf's report to me was as follows. As I mentioned to you yesterday, when I first saw George Burnside's production, I immediately rang Lou and asked him what was the score. Had he authorized its publication? He declared that he had not given anyone such permission. So it would seem that George has fired the gun without asking for the right to use another man's cartridges. And then back to the letter. When George Burnside was on our biblical research committee, he was asked if he was responsible for printing certain material that was being distributed, and he would not admit or deny it. You may remember this, or it may have happened after you left. At the last annual meeting of the Division Executive Committee, the Biblical Research Committee was reconstituted, and the president was appointed as the chairman, and the field secretary as the secretary of the committee. Some of the names of elective members to the committee were dropped, including the name of George Burnside. While we are disturbed, Des, that the material written by Lou Jones is being distributed by people, evidently without his permission, we are also disturbed by the fact that taped lectures and other material by Dr. Ford is being freely advertised and circulated in this division. A man by the name of Donald Croxton, advertising under the name Adventist Tape Service, has sent a flood of advertising material our way recently. He is offering cassettes produced by you, and of course is strongly promoting Paxton's book. Shows Parmenton.
Oh, this is my.
Oh yes. So I'll read that as well. Jill, the emphasis is mine. Shows Parmenton knew who was sending out tapes 2 years before Glacier View, and it was not Bob Brinsmead. That's a very good point, Gillian.
I only noticed that in the last few months. This is the benefit of going over and over stuff. You pick up things. And thank you, Pastor Parmenter, for telling us that.
Yeah, because that was quite a big thing later on, where accusations were flying, but he knew already. Wow, that is
and never said a word in the Friday afternoon.
Incredible. Incredible. The recording, back to the letter, the recording of the interview with Paxton at Loma Linda University is now available in this country, and your remarks on that occasion concerning Robert Brinsmead have added fuel to the fire of those who want to link your name with his. I think you are aware, Des, that as far as the Australian division is concerned, the issue with Robert Brinsmead is not just doctrinal. We are all very much aware that Robert has taken an about turn as far as some of his teachings are concerned. However, we see little change, if any, in his relationship to church organisation. It would be very easy for these two issues to become all mixed up in the conflict over righteousness by faith. I would hope, Des, that you would keep this in mind in any association you have with either Paxton or Brinsmead. Yeah, that's interesting too, isn't it? Thank you for passing. I didn't, so I'll just add something I said I wouldn't, but it's interesting there that
it's so tempting.
I can see yeah, that's right. I can see why later on there was such a desire for Des and Brinsmead not to be seen as working together, but historically, just looking back, it seems quite okay. But when you realise that the powers that be weren't happy with Des associating at all with these guys, they're kind of warning him a bit here. Anyway, I'll keep reading. Thank you for passing on the word that your book on Daniel is going into print at the Southern Publishing House. We have no question on the names of the men who have had the opportunity of reading your manuscript. However, it has been mentioned to me that it might have strengthened our hands somewhat if it could have been said that more than one Australian had the opportunity of perusing this book before it went into print. I'm sure that you are aware of the problems that we face here. I think it would have made it easier for us in this division, especially if we are attacked over what you have written, and you know that there are some who don't accept some of your interpretations, if at least we could tell our folk that the material was sent to a number of folk here in the Australasian division for reading before it went to print. I think you are aware, as Pastor Frame has pointed out to you on a few occasions, that the opposition often cite you as their prime exhibit when they wish to justify themselves in circulating material without first referring it to the division for counsel and approval. Just a few days ago, I had another inquiry as to whether the Australasian division had authorised your wife's booklet, and if not, why does it have a place in the Avondale College library?
That's the soteriological implications.
That's what I thought. It would seem today that there are many who feel they have an independent right to circulate other people's material, regardless of the consequences. Therefore, denominational workers have to be extremely careful not to appear independent in this area. Just referring back to Paxton's book for a moment, I would like to mention 3 things that have been stated by people who claim they have inside knowledge concerning your involvement in the production of this book.
I want you to take note. I know I'm interrupting, but you did it, so you set me a bad example. What he says, I'd like to mention 3 things that have been stated by people who claim to have inside knowledge. Now, I'll comment about that afterwards. This is somebody in the Brinsmead camp. I just want you to note that this letter is dated June 1978, which is nearly 2 years before Glacier View. So there's been, anyway, carry on.
They knew a lot more about behind the scenes than they let on later.
They were experts on behind the scenes.
Yeah. These are the 3 things that he wanted to mention. They are as follows. 1, that you supplied Paxton with a critique of the book before its publication. 2, that in the critique you suggested there wasn't sufficient concerning Robert Brinsmead in the book. And 3, that you assisted in the final editing of the book.
None of them true.
Yes.
Absolutely untrue, but believed.
Yeah. I would appreciate your comments on these points. I did have a letter from Bob Frame in which he mentioned that your meetings at Loma Linda seemed to be greatly appreciated. I note too from your letter that you visited several other centres and that soon you will be joining the brethren in Washington for a discussion on the subject of righteousness by faith. Is that the one that happened in 1979?
No, this is 78. There was a series of them, and Des was at both, but it's comments like that when you're not sure whether Des was actually there that tell you yes, he was. So he was at this meeting, and he was at the one in October 1979.
Right. So, Elder Eva wrote to me concerning this meeting, and I trust that the brethren will find some unanimity on this subject as they gather together there in Washington. We need to make the gospel so clear that even a child can understand. Souls are not won to Christ through argumentation. It is important that we hold the church together in the unity of the faith as it is in Christ. I know this is your desire too. May the Lord bless you, Gillian, and your family. May the Lord bless you, Gillian, and your family. And with Christian greetings, yours sincerely, Keith, President, KS Parmenter.
So that's the end of that letter. And as I've marked and commented, and it's good that you read it out because I find typos that I didn't in the book. I have to go back and fix them. So there's a number of things. A missionary in New Guinea said to me that they had terrible trouble around this time with Llewellyn Jones sending books pretending to be Ellen White stuff, but it was all George Burnside stuff. So I don't know how true it is that Lou Jones knew nothing about this, but, I wasn't there, so I don't know.
Did you want to read anything as a reply from Des at this stage? Or will I
No,
keep reading?
because I haven't put the reply to this letter in. I'll put another one later.
Yeah.
But notice how they use the publication of my booklet, which upset the concerned brethren. And to say that, look, you're doing it, and they're saying, well, if Jill Ford, if Dr. Ford's wife can publish stuff, so can we. So they use that. But the interesting thing is this comment about Don Croxton, Adventist Tape Service. It shows that the division were very well aware of what was going on, and they named him over a year before the forum tape was done. And I came across this, and of course that jumped out at me. This was fairly recently when I went over and reread all the letters, because in 2007 I thought to myself, because the accusation of Des sending out 50,000 tapes made in the Friday afternoon in the Prexad meeting, I thought, I wonder who did send out the tapes. So I spent hours, and I called all sorts of people in America, and I won't go into the details of it. I've got it in my it might be the first volume of my documents on Glacier View, where I've got those articles. So it took me a lot of work to find out in 2007 who actually sent out the tapes, because you've got to remember, we were in America. We didn't know what was going on. But obviously, and I'd contacted in 2007, I think it was, Don Croxton's wife by a series of things. She had a little bit of memory loss, but her son remembered that they sent out the tapes. Now, Don Croxton, his brother was a Brinsmead follower, but they had an independent group in New Mexico, and they sent out tapes. And so he'd been doing it for a couple of years before Glacier View. But on the Friday afternoon, Des was accused of giving Bob Brinsmead permission to send out 50,000 of the forum tapes. Des was quite pleased about this, but he knew nothing about it. And Gilbert Valentine has found that Neil Wilson brought this up to Des in February 1980, about 6 months before Glacier View. So that's the figure we remembered, and that's the figure Gilbert gives. So that was the accusation. You won't find it in the Spectrum or the Ministry, because only the vice presidents were in that meeting of Prexad. So nobody else knew that Bob Brinsmead was a big deal. He really wasn't mentioned during the week. And when they wrote up the Ministry magazine in October 1980, there's one vague reference. It doesn't mention Brinsmead, but there's one vague mention, and you would know, if you know it's Brinsmead, you'll realise what it is. I can find this stuff. But otherwise, he's not mentioned, but he was a big thing in the Friday afternoon. And of course, I don't know whether you want me to go into this again. I've done it before, but briefly, when we got to Glacier View, it was all around the floor that John Brinsmead had been down to Parmenter. And this letter, even though it's vague, suggests that somebody in the Brinsmead family had been talking to Parmenter as early as before June 1978. And if it wasn't John, who was it? But the name John Brinsmead was particularly mentioned. He was upset with Bob for writing his book on 1844, which came actually later, but of course John knew what was going on beforehand, and he didn't like that. So that's where those rumours came from. But I was in it because I was supposedly, so Des could say, according to what was going around the floor, so Des could say, I'm not connected with Bob. I was the one who was the mediator, and it just never happened. Absolutely never happened. So we looked at each other and we said, how bizarre, what's this stuff about John Brinsmead? We knew nothing about it. But the
Well, they
brethren never, ever asked me about it. They didn't in the Friday afternoon meeting. They never did since. They never asked me, are you in touch with Bob Brinsmead? Because the rumour was I would call out at night. Well, I never called Bob. I never called Australia. But I was accused of court. And they said they thought Bob was actually in the building. They thought he was in a motel nearby. They thought I was calling out to him. It was all fictional. But they believed it, but they never talked to me. See, I've got a big thing about this.
Do you think they were also using a tactic there that they knew that Bob Brinsmead was not liked within the church, and they just wanted to associate you guys with Bob to give you a bad name because Bob already had a bit of a bad name in the church?
I think
it
it
a
was
tactic?
a useful tool, but it was a commonly thought thing. And Herbert Douglas, who talked about the Ford Brinsmead mateship back in the 70s, even possibly about 1975. So it was just assumed, but never thought of asking us. And anyway, they would not have believed us. But that's the reason for putting that in, and to show that the three things about Paxton's book. Des saw the book after it was published. I've just formatted for volume 3 a review that Des did on Paxton's book. It's a very good one. But there was no, these people, Bob, etc., they were very independent. They didn't want to join with Des because they would divide the loyalty of their own people. They had a fund base. Why would they, Anyway, it never happened. But these things that Paxton had a critique, that in the critique, he suggested there wasn't sufficient concerning Bob Brinsmead.
Yeah.
Well, there was a lot in there about Bob Brinsmead, and that you assisted in the final editing. Never happened.
Yeah.
So, but the point of the letter is those comments suggest that Parmenter was already in touch with someone in the Brinsmead camp, because it mentions they've been stated by people who claim that they have inside knowledge.
Yeah, which we will come to. Let's move on to the next letter. This is Keith Parmenter to Des, and it is October 30, 1978. Again, you're in Pacific Union College still, and at that time, Des was happily lecturing over there at Pacific Union College. You were happily nestled into your endeavours, and these
Mainly
letters.
me and Luke on the weekends, because Des was hardly ever there.
Yeah, and these letters were brewing, foretelling a future soon to come. Okay, here it is. Dear Des, it's Keith Parmenter. I had hoped it might be possible for me to make personal contact with you during my recent visit to the annual council in Washington. I did try to telephone you, but I was told that you were away at La Sierra at the time. Brother Taylor and I came through Los Angeles this time so that he could visit with our students and their families both at Loma Linda and at Andrews. With our tight schedule, we were not able to fit in a visit to PUC as well. I'm hoping, however, that Eric Magnuson will be able to make a visit sometime next year. I hope you, your wife and family are all well and that you are enjoying your work at PUC. I spoke with Dr. Jack Castle in Washington, and he indicated that he appreciated having you in his team. There are some things, however, that do concern me, Des. I thought I should share with you some of the very definite impressions that I received from brethren in leadership in North America and from some overseas men. I believe your basic understanding of justification is scriptural. 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 However, there are some who do not go along with you entirely in your presentation of the subject of righteousness by faith and other theological issues. I found many questioning your methodology more than your theology. There is a feeling that you lack balance in the presentation of the subjects of justification and sanctification. While many of us might agree with your understanding of justification, we are concerned that the subject is being presented in such a controversial and aggressive manner. I think you would have to admit, Des, that there is some polarization as far as the church is concerned on this very vital issue. I'm sure you are aware of the many statements in the writings of Ellen White that the fruitage of such a message should bring revival and encouragement to believers and lead them into a strong witnessing program. You will remember your last meeting with our Australasian Division Committee. You strongly emphasized the fact that when our membership is really confident about their standing with God, they will not have to be urged to witness for Christ. Some of the North American leaders with whom I spoke claim that this fruitage is not evident. In fact, a few went as far as claiming that there is a falling off in church attendance and an indifference towards obedience to the commandments of God as a result of such preaching. This criticism is not leveled at you alone. However, this must lead us all to ask the serious question: are our people really hearing the message correctly? Are we really presenting the glorious message of justification, sanctification, and the victorious life of obedience through Christ in proper balance? It is felt, Des, that in your endeavor to give justification its rightful place, you lead people to think that the sanctified life of obedience is not greatly important. That's an important little sentence there, isn't it? I think that people always misunderstand you and Des on that exact little few lines there. It is felt, Des, that in your endeavor to give justification its rightful place, you lead people to think that the sanctified life of obedience is not greatly important, which is not true. I know this is not your intention, but when you use what some people think are exaggerated statements, such as comparing justification to the ocean and sanctification to a thimbleful, you leave people with the impression that you don't have much regard for the imparted righteousness of Christ. Is it possible, Des, that in your endeavor to counter the doctrines of grace and law, legalism and perfectionism, you are leaving many of your hearers with the impression that obedience to God's law is not really so important? When people hear you say, I sin 1,000,000 times a day, they seem to get the distinct impression that you believe that it is impossible to keep God's law, even with the help of Christ and the Holy Spirit. Therefore, why should we try? Furthermore, it is to be questioned as to whether there is any real wisdom in a minister thus demeaning himself in public. I wish I could sit down and talk to you about some of these things, Des. I have a high regard for you as a fellow minister, and I hope you will receive this letter in the brotherly spirit in which it is written. You will remember that I did appeal to you after our meeting here in Wahroonga with the retired ministers to dwell on the positive things in our message that bind us together as a people. I believe with all my heart that the message of justification and sanctification are central to all the doctrines of the Bible. However, God's people need a balanced diet. You will remember that I appealed to you to balance your preaching with sermons on the great subject of the sanctuary, the second advent, the home of the saved, the law of God, the Sabbath, the judgment, the call out of Babylon, etc. I've heard you preach on these subjects, and you have warmed my heart. It is the message that made us Adventists, that will keep us in the church. Neither you nor I will be able to help the church if we allow ourselves to become the center of controversy. I know you feel deeply concerning the matter of righteousness by faith, and so do many of your brethren. But we must ever remember that we are shepherds of the flock and should not go any faster than the sheep are able to follow. You are aware, no doubt, that in Australasia, as well as in some overseas divisions, your name is constantly being connected with Paxton and Brinsmead. Unfortunately, this is an image that you are going to find very difficult to shake off. While Paxton may have been one of the church's most friendly critics, there is much in his book that neither I nor many of our theologians or church leaders can accept. I've counselled you in this area previously, as you are much aware. I'm enclosing a copy of a letter and document that came to my desk from J.W. Kent this morning. I'd be glad of your comments. Your book on Daniel and Revelation, and you've noted there, Jill, just Daniel, has just come to hand in the Australasian division and seems to be stirring up quite a bit of controversy. In fact, some are demanding that our ABC centres do not handle the book. You are accused of presenting an approach to the prophecies characteristic of futurism, especially with reference to your treatment of the Antichrist. There is strong reaction to your involving the name of F.F. Bruce in commendation of your work. Some folks are asking already whether and when you will be returning to Avondale. Naturally, I've discussed this matter with some of our leaders in the Australasian Division and at Washington. Apart from any doctrinal controversy which may surround your name, the general feeling is that it is not wise to have one man putting his mould on the ministry over too long a period. Unfortunately, we only have one senior college in this division. It is felt that it would be best for you to continue your service overseas for a longer period if this can be arranged. If not, we may need to study the possibility of using you in evangelism or pastoral work for a period of time. As mentioned earlier, I would like to have been able to talk with you personally about some of these matters, but time didn't allow for this. I would be happy to hear from you, Des, when you have had opportunity to think about some of the things that I've mentioned in this letter. I've tried to have a heart-to-heart chat with you as a personal friend. I hope you take what I have said in that spirit. Please convey my best wishes to your wife and family, and I trust that the Lord will continue to bless your ministry. With warm personal greetings, Keith.
So I've talked about this before, and I've written a short paragraph, saying the same thing. This was written on October the 30th, 1978, after Keith Parmenter has been to annual council, which was October 10 to 18 that year. So he's just gone back, and he's writing this letter about 12 days later. So he's apparently discussed this with the GC leaders, and he's asked Jack Castle to keep Des longer in USA. He went back to Australia. He announced to workers, I don't know where this was. It could have been in Sydney. It could have been at Avondale. I can't remember even who told me now. But I believe they phoned because of the timing. A letter wouldn't have got there in time. So Parmenter goes home from annual council, and he tells the workers that Des is staying on at PUC and that Jack Castle has asked him to stay. So I thought, and I'd never done this before, this is one of my unusual acts, I thought, I'm going to go and talk to Jack Castle. So I turned up at his office the day I called and found out when he was coming back. I turned up at his office and asked if I could talk to him. And I said, we've heard that we're staying here. We're not going back to Australia. And he said, why, yes. Pastor Parmenter asked him to keep Des on. He thought it would make things easier in the Australasian division if Des remained at PUC. So it wasn't as Parmenter, no, I'm going by apart from what Castle told me, whoever talked to me, that's the second-hand report. So I can't say what Parmenter actually said in that workers' meeting, but the thought was that Jack Castle had asked him to keep Des because they liked having him there, is what Castle said. Well, Parmenter almost said that in that letter. I won't go back and look now. So Parmenter, he seems to tell the workers that Jack Castle asked him to keep him, whereas Jack Castle said Parmenter asked him to keep. So it was the other way around. And 2 weeks later, this letter came, and It's very chatty, and it goes through all the accusations against Des. And then on page 3 of the original letter, he starts saying that, you know, you're not coming back to Avondale. You're staying on, and if you do come back, you go into evangelism. Now, I've got a letter of Vern Parmenter's, which was sent to Milton Hook and Arthur Patrick. And he said that his father offered Des the job of being the top evangelist in Australia. Now, that wasn't, I never heard that before. I don't think it was true. And Des's feeling when he received that letter, I'm going to read you the response. And Norm Young almost had a heart attack when he read this letter. If you read it twice, it's not that bad, but he's very straight because he knows what's going on.
Yes, yes.
And he said to me, if I go back to Australia, I'll be put out in the whoop whoop and they will fire me.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, Des was idealistic. He almost lived in another world, but he knew men's hearts. He could read what was going on always.
Yes,
So,
he knew what they were doing. Now, I want to encourage
you. This is my viewpoint. You know, you at least you can see what Parmenter was saying about Des and his preaching. And of course, the people he's been talking to in America would be people like Kenneth Wood and Herb Douglas, and the fact that the right-wing traditionalists had opposed Des for years and made his life miserable, and Burnside had sent his books on Dr. Ford's dangerous doctrines. Wherever Des went, the churches or the campgrounds, it would either be in every tent or in every church. They littered the place. It must have cost a fortune. It was highly planned because, you know, obviously somebody in America was working with them. But that
and
never
here too,
up.
the Concerned Brethren were very well funded.
Yeah,
like
that never
Ragnar
comes
Marx
up
was a
as
very
a
wealthy
source
man.
of division. It never gets brought up as a source of division. Des is the one who's divisive.
That's right. It's the other way around.
One thing I would have liked to have put in here, and I forgot, and I don't think I've got it in my books, and I keep thinking I've got to put that in, is a letter. I think it's somebody Clark, but I might have the name wrong. I don't know who it is, but an American who came out just before we went to PUC. So it's early 1977, and he's writing to Des to congratulate him on the spirit of the students on the campus. No division, spiritual, engaged. It's a beautiful letter, but I don't know who it was. Whereas, you know, Burnside was going up to Avondale in those years. He was ministerial secretary, I'm not sure which years, interviewing all the students to get stuff on Des. He worked on this really for decades. And so they're spreading the idea that the students are terribly unhappy. But, you know, I was there at Avondale. The faculty and the students, by and large, were happy with the gospel. And I don't remember this terrible division on campus. And I'm sure a lot of you were there at the same time. I was there for 5 years, critical years, 66 to 1970. I married Des the same year. So you get the picture. Des is blamed for dividing the church. That came up in the 1983 letter from Neil Wilson, which I read last week. What you're teaching is divisive. But the way Des's enemies behaved, and, you know, that was divisive. Dividing businesses, lost people their jobs. Anyway.
Now, those watching, I just want to encourage, please feel free to post questions or comments because we can bring them in. For example, this Facebook user pointed out in the last letter where Keith says, your aggressive approach, they've made a comment here. This word always makes an appearance when dissenters are being maneuvered out of a group. That's very true. Instead of playing... Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, instead of playing the ball, they always play the the player. They always attack the player instead of attacking the information and the content. They always like to say, "Oh, you're just being aggressive," or "You have an axe to grind," and instantly trying to take away the credibility of what you're saying. But they're never good at actually saying, "Well, you're saying this. I'd like to disagree on these grounds." So yeah, encouraging people to write comments like that. Will we go into the letter now with you reading Des's
Yes, I was just going
reply?
to say, based on that Facebook comment, that I've got permission from Spectrum to publish about 6 whole articles in Volume 3. So I picked out key ones from, the Forum Glacier View period, and I was doing one from Walter Utt, who was the head of the history department when we were at PUC. I don't know if you remember this, but he died of AIDS because
I didn't know that.
he had haemophilia. He was one of the early ones, and they gave him blood, and he got it from a wonderful man, very intellectual. But in this article, he talks about Des's peculiar and something around his personality. And I don't think Des was aggressive,
No.
I mean, you can listen to all his tapes.
Yeah.
It's almost
he's clearly sometimes forthright and sometimes to the point, but he is never aggressive. Like
no. Well, he was pretty.
there's
this is about as
volumes of
aggressive
his.
as Des gets.
Yeah, I love the opening sentence. We'll get you started on that. I just want to give a quick plug to, we're referring to occasionally your series On the Way to Glacier View. Volume 1 and Volume 2 are out and are a must read. Go and buy them on Amazon. They're absolutely incredible. And Volume 3 is coming very soon, I hope.
Oh, well. Well, I don't know whether you can see this because my video is not working. Can you see that?
Yes, I can see it. Hold it up a tiny little bit. Yeah, there we go. It's a great picture too.
Well, the significance of this was it's about the only professional photo Des and I had taken, and it was taken at Washington, D.C. in July 1980. So that's why it's on the cover. This is just before Glacier View. This is Des at 51 and me at 35. And I told you that wherever we were, Luke told everybody that I was 35, and that's why I remember. You see, this was a passage of, and then this is Volume 2, and it has other people in it. The first one is sort of me and Des. The second one, we're still in there, but there's over 200 pages of letters. And now I'm working on Volume 3, and I realised I was meant to do it. And I found more letters, including one that I've got here that's not in Volume 2. It's a very important letter. But anyway, this is Des's letter to Keith Parmenter.
Just before we say that, someone just asked an interesting question from a YouTube viewer, Moto Sapien. How are you? Thanks for being a regular supporter and watcher of our show, our program. Forgive my inference as I'm still catching up on Desmond and his position. Was he aggressive in his position? What were they referring to? And I think we kind of just chatted about that. I personally think he wasn't aggressive, and they are saying he was aggressive just to taint anything he said. It's a tactic, isn't it? It's an ad hominem attack where people attack the player and not the ball. They try and discredit the player rather than discussing the issues. And the only time I've ever noticed Des be a little bit forward, as he is in the opening sentence, it's always done with a little sense of wit or a mild frustration that he's almost thinking, do I have to explain this again? But he definitely, as a person and a human, and you knew him better than most, that he wasn't that kind of a person. He was a virtuous, honourable man that strived to be a good human being. That's the irony, isn't it? You could look at his life as literally the manifestation of sanctification unfolding in a good way, even though he was saying that's not how you get into heaven.
Des had a PhD in rhetoric, and he had another one in New Testament. And he was an orator, But the thing about Des was you couldn't miss what he was saying. What he was saying was, I suppose, seen as an attack on the investigative judgment, because he felt that the gospel of righteousness by faith taught that because of Christ's life and death put to our account, we actually go through the judgment when we come to Christ, when we accept him. And as long as we remain in Christ, we've already passed through judgment. And John 5:24 says exactly that. So Des didn't believe that in 1844 you started another phase of the atonement, and that you then, the believer, went into a phase of scrutiny about their sins. He said that was not biblical. So of course he was there to say this, and he said to me before he died, I didn't go to Glacier View to change my mind. He said I'd done the work. And he wasn't the only one. The interesting thing about Walter Utt's article, he takes for granted that what Des says about the investigative judgment is right, and that most scholars knew it. But, you know, Des used to say that Americans are, what was the word? Oriental. They like to present things very smoothly. And so Des comes along and he's just too direct for them.
You
but
can see
there's no heat in it. Des was like he had energy. If I was away from home, like when I used to work in Texas, I'd go home once a month for a weekend. And I think Des has, he's like the Energizer Bunny. His energy is different to anybody else that I meet. So he was like a cyclone, but he was the heart of the storm. Had deep peace. We went to a Chinese doctor once, and he tested Des's pulses, and he said to me, "This man has deep peace."
Yeah.
But he had this huge energy.
I think too that, like, there's a line in the previous letter that we just read from Keith, where he says, "But we must ever remember that we are shepherds of the flock, and should not go any faster than the sheep are able to follow." And to me, that's quite condescending, self-righteous, and a pious thing to say. Whereas Des actually was able to speak to the people, and he showed respect to the people, and he would never have said that we have to just keep up at your pace. I think he believed in the intelligence and the good nature and the ability of the sheep to actually take on board this material and to process it and be fine with it, and many were. So if anything, to me, that's a passive aggressive thing to say, we should not go any faster than the sheep are able to follow. Whereas Des was just, here's this information, I think you can cope with it, no problems. Which is,
I've told you about this book of Doug Hackelman's that he's working on. It's about the Cottrell family, and I read the first 34 chapters. This will be several years ago. He's had a bit of a break, but he's back onto it. And the thing that impressed me about that book was that the issues that Des brought up about the investigative judgment have come up repeatedly through the years, commonly known by the scholars. But of course, they talk to each other, and they don't see it as necessary to disturb the language. See, that's another issue.
That's right. They tended to go along with what Keith was saying there. The other thing that annoys me about that approach is that when Des would say, "Look, these guys are on board with me, 95% of them are on board with me," he was meaning about the investigative judgment and how all of them pretty much agreed that it wasn't biblical. But whenever I would ask them this in season 2, which was focusing on Glacier View, they would say, "Oh, we didn't always agree with Des," as if they were trying to make it, "Oh, he said we agreed, but we didn't," which he was referring to a specific thing that 95% of them did agree with, and season 2 has confirmed that because they've admitted it. When you were saying Doug, you're meaning, what's the other famous book he wrote?
Oh, I know it well, but I can't think of it on the spot.
Yeah, I've got a bunch of copies of that.
He's an excellent writer and thinker.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah, I think
I thought I had it with me.
And by the way, he thinks my two books, he came on Facebook and said they were masterpieces.
Could you ask him on my behalf to come and do another interview with me? Because in the interview I did with him, we chatted a lot about the Cottrell work and how much we would love to see that material released. So if you could ask on my behalf, would be great. And Robert Lindbeck has donated to me, I think, at least 20, maybe 50 of those books, which we're going to sell very cheaply. So if you're interested, contact me.
Which books?
It's the one, the Hackelman one. He watches who
watches Who Cares?
Yeah, Who Watches Who Cares. Brilliant book, and we're going to make it available for pretty much cost of postage and $5. Robert Limbeck has donated at least 20 or more. So if you're interested, shoot me a message. Right, let's get on with the program. You're about to read for us Des Ford's reply to Keith Parmenter, November 3, 1978.
So, yeah, this is Des pretty straight. So, you know, you can criticize him for that. Norm Young did. But anyway, Des knew that he had capitulated to the pressures from the old men. And he mentions in that previous letter that he said, you and the old men met with me, or we met together. That would have been one of Froome's meetings, probably in 1976, where Parmenter would have attended, but he didn't call the meeting. And remember that after we went to America, he had, in the Gathering Storm, it's all described, but they had a number of meetings of the old men with Parmenter. One of them, over 100, it might have been more, but I'm not very good at remembering numbers. So they met, but Des wasn't there to answer. But the three meetings that were held in the 70s, whenever Des was there to defend himself, he won. But when Parmenter came in, it was different. So anyway, let me read the letter, else we'll be here for 6 months. So this one is Des's response to that October 20 letter, or whatever it was, November the 3rd, 1978. And it is pretty straight, but I think it's polite. But Des never got in a bad temper, but he was a person of principle, and if you made a promise, you didn't break it. And he felt that what this was doing was ultimately pulling him. He had no future in teaching. And that was what Des was about. He wanted to be in the classroom teaching Adventist ministers, didn't want to be somewhere else in a university, an outside university. He wanted to teach Adventist young men the gospel. So he took this hard, and so he writes, Dear Keith, I appreciate your candid letter. I know you'd wish me to reply in the same vein. And because I esteem you so highly as a friend and a Christian leader of sterling integrity, and also because we must soon meet at the bar of God to give an account of our stewardship, I'll say what seems to me to be relevant for our eternal well-being and the prosperity of the church in the here and now.
That paragraph, you could write a doctoral piece on that. Sorry, go on.
To write a fellow minister a notice of intended exile and prospective sacking from his position if he returns is no slight matter. And I would anticipate that you felt you had the best of reasons. To come to your conclusions before hearing the accused is somewhat surprising. You say you question my methodology more than my theology, and you quote some you acquired to the same effect. My inquiry is, did you ask men who'd heard me take a series of meetings, or men who'd responded on the basis of gossip? Are you prepared to take a step of some magnitude on the ground of unfair accusation which has never been thoroughly sifted? Did you, for example, inquire of Duncan Eva, J.R. Spangler, or any of the presidents who've actually been in my meetings? If the present GC President Neil Wilson can say, as he did 6 weeks ago in the presence of J.R. Spangler, Des, you cannot fairly be accused of not believing or not preaching sanctification. Why does the president of the Australasian Division think otherwise? The president of Northern California, Phil Follett, had heard that accusation, therefore listened to a series of tapes of mine, and then wrote me that he found the accusation to be false. Will the president of the Australasian Division be prepared to take the same trouble in view of his responsibility of making a decision on the basis of an accusation declared untrue by other church leaders? Duncan Eva certainly does not believe that I downgrade sanctification, nor Spangler, or any president who's heard me through a series. Recently, I spoke to the leaders of the Southern Union and about 800 doctors and dentists. No such charge was made by Elder Smith, the union president. On the contrary, the leaders there expressed their thanks for the messages. Similarly, at camp meetings I've spoken of, I'm sending you my last general meeting at the La Sierra campus last month. Please listen to it. Let me know if you think it savours of antinomianism. You cite the I sin a million times a day statement without any context. Could not some of your own statements and inspired ones from Ellen White of Scripture be similarly misunderstood? The chief biblical words for sin in both the Old and the New Testaments means to miss the mark, to fall short. Scripture says we are all falling short of the glory of God continually. If, as the case, the law demands perfect righteousness, perfection of feeling, desire, thought, work, attitude, motive, look and action, see First Selected Messages 211 and Steps to Christ 61. If the law demands that I do all things as well as Adam, is it not true that every one of us sins a million times a day? Furthermore, in view of the number used, how can the speaker have meant anything else than what's just been expressed? There is just not enough time if outward actions were meant. Second, because the statement has been so unfairly quoted, I do not think I've used it in any one of my last 500 sermons. So why should it still be cast up, as though after much search this is all that can be found? And why do not people, if honest, cite a much, much more frequently used statement that if we claim to believe in Christ, we shall have an intense concentration on God's viewpoint about everything, how eating, drinking, dressing, sexing, spending, etc. And another, I would not work my soul to save, for that the Lord has done, but I would work like any slave for love of God's dear Son. Why do not my accusers not quote my frequent statement that to be a Christian means to make a continual review of every habit and practice in the light of the law of God? You also blame me because the fruitage of witnessing for Christ is not evident in the North American Division, as though the ripple of the presence of one speaker for a year could be intended to reverse the legalistic thrust of the century. I cannot believe you're serious. You ask if we are really presenting the message of justification and sanctification in proper balance. Of course, by we, you mean me. I would, sorry for laughing. I would answer that if Ellen White could write as follows, we must be very careful of such an accusation. You know the statement, but have you pondered it and applied it and urged it upon every worker under your influence as one who must one day give an account for his knowledge of this inspired emphasis? Here it is. Many have been kept from the faith because of the mixed, confused ideas of salvation, because the ministers have worked in a wrong manner to reach hearts. The point which has been urged upon my mind for years is the imputed righteousness of Christ. I've wondered that this matter was not made the subject of discourses in our churches throughout the land, when the matter has been kept so constantly urged upon me, and I have made it the subject of nearly every discourse and talk that I've given to the people. The light given to me of God places this important subject above any question in my mind. Justification, etc. Manuscript 36, 1890. See the October Ministry, page 5. Not sure what year that was. Please note, Ellen White says the reason for the paucity of converts is that justification is not preached enough. As you think on the evangelistic results in Australia, could this statement have some relevance? I would also point out that Paul clearly says that deliverance from sin's power never comes until sin's guilt has been removed by the gracious, forgiving power of God. Romans 6:14-15. Sin ceases to have dominion, not because we harp on the law, but because we stress grace. The accusation you are echoing was made against Christ and Paul. Indeed, where such an accusation does not arise, it is because the gospel is not being preached. There are indeed risks in proclaiming the gospel. The risk that some will turn the grace of God into lasciviousness. But the risk is minimal compared with the risk of not preaching it. I know in your heart you believe these things to be true. And I urge you as a friend and brother to have the courage to follow the Lord's counsel in this matter, regardless of ignorant critics. You are to come along with about 12 other leaders in the world's division, under the most searching scrutiny of all in that great day. And I will be less than your friend if I did not remind you of it. If, as Gospel Workers 161, Ellen White says Satan's power can only be broken by preaching the imputed merits of Christ, why should you hesitate to employ a man who is proclaiming just that? Type sideways on the left. Being but a drop in the ocean. Couldn't read the first bit. This is exactly what Scripture says when it calls the work of the Spirit in us only the first fruits. Romans 8:23. Imputed righteousness is like all the sheaves of first fruits of the world, but according to Holy Writ, our imparted righteousness is but a single sheaf. How could it be otherwise when it is the infinite righteousness of God which is imputed? 2 Corinthians 5:21. Back to the main letter. You refer to my book on Daniel. I can only conclude that you have not yet had opportunity to study it. It is a result of over 30 years of study. My specific reason in going to England, to Manchester University, was to find support for answers I was giving to critics of our sanctuary teachings. I found that support in scholarly literature of several countries, and the evidence is incorporated in my commentary. You know as well as I do the E.G. White counsels about our being specifically called to be students of prophecy, especially of Daniel and Revelation, but then when these books are better understood, then there will be revival. Would you do me the honour of reading the book for yourself? In the meantime, can you remind the critics that whether their judgment is better than that of Duncan Eva, Siegfried Horn, Dr. Graham Maxwell and SPA is a matter of some doubt. I've already written you regarding Brother Kent's accusations from my thesis. May I also point out that because of the stringent conditions involved in scholarly work for a university, it would be quite impossible for Kent or Burnside to read any PhD thesis written by any of our scholars, including Gerhard Hasel and other men of undoubted orthodoxy, and not find things which to them are obnoxious. Now, if necessary, I can and will document this contention, and in view of that fact, it would be wise to restrain Burnside and Kent. In no idle way, I would repeat that I regard you as a man of the highest integrity. I believe your decisions are reached with prayer and conscientious spirit. On this basis, I've taken the time to challenge your present conclusions that beneath the eye of the Omniscient One, both of us might do those things which will meet his approval in that great day. With the warmest of regards, sincerely your brother.
Oh, I love it. What an incredible letter. That's what I'm so honoured, and thank you for agreeing to do this presentation today. It's really helping to create a really clear picture of what was going on. And by reading the whole letter, the letters, it just brings in that extra nuance and context. That was fantastic. Any thoughts on that before we go to the next one?
In these letters, you've seen the real concerns of Keith Parmenter. So I've shown you his letters were courteous and friendly. And for me, they're full of little nuggets that are documentary evidence which I think is absolutely wonderful. And
Yeah.
Des, now you've seen Des at his worst, really, in that letter, because when you read the other letters that I've put in my books, and I've got letters to Colin and Russell Standish separately,
Yeah.
where Des is so courteous, he imputes to them the highest of motivations, and he speaks to
Yeah.
them, and he was always like that. I've
Yeah.
told you that we used to socialise with the Standish brothers, despite the shocking things that they said about Des. We
Yeah.
were always friendly. They'd been in their home over there
Yeah.
at this time and later. We never held their behaviour against them. Des said to Russell, you could hit me on the head with a hammer and I'd still be a friend. And that was his genuine attitude. And there's also a letter in the second volume to George Knight where Des is explaining how George is misrepresenting him on justification. It's absolutely beautiful letter, the spirit of it. And there's a letter to can't think of his first name, Marx,
Raglan.
who put all his finances behind, and was shocking what he said about Des, but Des is so courteous, and that was what Des was like. So anyway, those letters are,
is that one to Raglan in volume 3? Is that going to be in volume?
No, that's in volume 2.
Oh, I haven't seen that one.
Yeah, it's there.
Yeah, okay. You might have to have a volume 4.
No more volumes. I didn't plan volume 1.
After volume 3. Make sure you do volume 3. We want to hear it. We want to read it. Okay, well, let's get you. What we're going to do is we'll read this Des to Keith, January 4, and then we'll finish today with me reading Keith's reply to Des on September 6, plus hearing you just summarize some thoughts. And then we'll reconvene. Will we try again for Thursday next week?
Yeah, I think that's all right.
Be good
I
to
have to
do
check my business program, but I think it's all right.
Be good to get these in a row on YouTube. Having said that, there will be an interview, quick plug, coming up with the Naked Pastor on Wednesday next week. It's going to be a fascinating interview. I'm really excited to be interviewing the Naked Pastor. Wednesday, I'll just check, 9:30 a.m. I think it is. 9:30 Wednesday, our time, which is Sydney, New South Wales. And of course, the Naked Pastor's name is David Hayward, and he's a very popular cartoonist. Okay, let's get back to the program.
So when is John coming back?
So I'm hoping I've got to chat to John. It'll be either this Monday night or the Monday night after our time, because we want to finish that very interesting series of conversations as well. But I've been away for a week in Brisbane, so I'm just trying to catch up with everything.
Part of doing these books on Glacier View, which I told you weren't even in my head in February, so they've happened fast, is that I have a pretty good understanding of what's in the I've got scanned copies of all the documents, so I've been through, and I really gleaned it to do volume 1 and 2. But then what happened after that, I thought I ought to do a brief overview of what the leaders did from 1978, which is turfing Des out of Avondale, to 1983. And I did charts as well with that, with about 20 pages. And I went to put it in volume 2, but it's already 474 pages. And I thought, looks like I'm going to do a volume 3. So I had that. But I've gone back through again and thought it's slim pickings really, but I've found a lot of stuff. And then I told you I've talked to Spectrum, and I didn't think they would let me, but they're going to let me publish 6 of the key articles from the Glacier View period, including the one from Adrian Sikorsky in 1983 when Des was apostatized. That was never publicly announced, but it's in all the documents.
Wow.
So they declared him apostate.
Fantastic.
And you remember when I read out Wilson's letter last week, I almost broke down. And the reason is because of the impact it brought back, the memories. Because at the time, I could not believe that the denomination would declare Des apostate, because apostate means you've turned away from Christ. And Des had talked to them, as I've mentioned before, in the meetings in San Francisco in 1983, which I'll come back to later probably, but I talked about them before, and said to them, you can't, the GNU men were there and I was there, and after they decided it was all over, they had time to just sit and talk to each other, and Des said, you can't call us apostate because we haven't left Christ. A better word is dissident. But then when it went back to Washington, it doesn't matter what gets said in the meeting, the term apostate was used. And the wonderful thing about Adrian Zukoski's article is Adrian was brilliant. He was, I think he was a social science teacher, but he was very smart. And he saw what was happening. He mentions the apostasy bit. And see, how that helps me is I know what was said. And I know that it happened. But to try and find it in the documentary evidence is difficult. But Adrian points it out because he mentions the changes that were made in Manila in October 1982, all done behind the scenes to fire Des. But it talks
And this is in the Spectrum article.
Yeah.
Great.
So then I went and looked up the meeting and I found the actual text of what was changed. So number one, and what Adrian says is that those meetings were a carry-on from Glacier View. Now, you wouldn't know that because the way it was presented, I've said before, probably more than once, that when this happens to you, when you're in the seat being fired at, they tell you as little as possible about the Brinsmead thing. We didn't know what was going on the time of Glacier, about. They never talked to us about it. And in 1983, the presentation to us that came from General Conference was that Elder Wilson wanted to meet with Des so that the possibility of bringing back into the church. But that was what you find out when you go through the church documents and you look at Adrian's article. That was never the intention. There's always a backstory, and the backstory was we've got to deal with Des. He's going around saying that he's an ordained Seventh-day Adventist minister. But there's sort of a plan in dealing with somebody who is doctrinally suspect, and this was a continuation. And see, because the Australasian Division and Good News Unlimited shared documents, and I have those documents, I can show you that this starting of getting Des apostatized, I call it, began, but it was really a continuation. And the wonderful thing about Adrian's article is that he's put it all together. Very, very bright man. So that helps me to put together a case.
Yeah.
That's the thing about having these Spectrum articles. Other people saw exactly what was going on. They didn't always interpret Des right, but I'm biased. I'm Des's wife. So, and I don't think people will listen to me because of that. But when other people back up something that you have painstakingly put together with documentary evidence, they can't refute it. And that is what I've tried to do anyway.
I think on the way to Glacier View, the 3 volumes, while you've got a mountain of work that you're leaving behind and a legacy that you're leaving for future generations, I think this could possibly be your most important resource, because it's putting forward things that you knew, excuse me, but with actual evidence that corroborates it in one location, in one set of books.
It's not all the documents, but it's
a summary. Yeah.
for people, it's really for researchers. That's why I've done
Yeah.
it, because of what happened with what's happening at Avondale Archives, and worry that there won't be access to
To
this
that.
collection. Well, I thought, okay, what I can do is put them in books.
Yeah.
And then instead of having to go through the catalogue, because it's not being digitized, it's not going to be on a computer where you can go and search. You got to go through the catalogue. I thought, I'll put them in books.
Yes. Yeah,
And
that's right.
so my experience of being there, being
Yeah.
married to Des, having some, I'm not a theologian, but I've always got the point about the gospel, about what Des taught on prophecy. I understood what he was saying. And then I was a typographer and worked for magazines and did graphic design and all that stuff. So I put together books, and I've done a lot of editing. And then I went back to uni and I did, two degrees in history. And so I've got that collection of things where it's something I can do. So I'm going to do it.
You've got an important skill set. Yeah. Someone's just written this thought or question. Are there any letters between Desmond and Dr. Maxwell? He's a bit of a controversial figure to some SDA himself. And I've heard Maxwell mention that Des was a student of his and spoke well of him.
I think I know who Moto Sapien is. I think Des actually highly regarded Graham Maxwell. Graham Maxwell agreed with him on the investigative judgment. I never heard Des say anything bad about him, but on the ideas level, he did not agree with his teaching on the moral influence theory. Now, for decades at Loma Linda, Graham Maxwell and who's our friend who's the ethicist, Jack Provencher, taught dentists and doctors a form of the moral influence theory, which was anti-substitutionary atonement. In fact, Graham Maxwell called it butcher shop theology. So, of course, Des objects to that, but he never objected to the man because Graham Maxwell was an excellent man.
Yeah. Okay, let's get...
You've got to distinguish between disagreeing with people on ideas and what you think of them as people.
Yeah, and that's what SDAQ&A is about. The reason I've put together this whole program is for people to discuss divergent views and beliefs, but to still explore the possibility of being friends as well, and even finding admiration in some people, regardless of if you agree with them or not.
Now, Maury
It's a rare thing to try and put together.
Maury Venden's hero was Graham Maxwell. See, and
Really?
yeah. Graham Maxwell
did you say there were letters? Did you say that you did have some letters between Des and Maxwell?
Not that I know of, no.
Right.
But they did meet. I mean, he was at Glacier.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't actually talk to him.
Yeah, okay.
Murdoch, who married Des and Gwen, was there. I didn't even know that. And I said to Des, just before he died, I said, "You didn't introduce me." I said, "I didn't talk to anybody really except Norman." So he was trying to, he was exhausted.
Yeah. Okay, let's get to this letter. This is Des to Keith Parmenter, January 4, 1979. I'll then read Des's reply to Keith I'll then read Keith's reply to Des September 6, and then we'll reconvene next week.
Somebody just asked a question about how did you curate the letters? Well, the letters that were in the collection, I sorted out. Des had 100 boxes of documents, and I think a lot of documents would have been lost in the move from America. So I went through separating Des's documents and other important documents that were related to Des, and the sort of thing like Des's notes, the sort of thing that Des read because he was constantly writing and constantly doing TV programs. So you know, I didn't copy all of that stuff. I copied about 40 boxes of stuff. And I've tried to be careful, at least so far, because I do feel I've got to consider what Des would do, not necessarily what I'd like to do. And I do have some letters that I haven't published. They are in the collection, where I don't, partly because of families and, I don't want to, I just don't want to be mean. Des wouldn't do it. No, Des had something, he had some special thing stuck in his head where he was able to lift himself above all this nastiness that was aimed towards him and not hold a grudge. So I'm deliberating over some of those letters in volume 3. I'm not going to publish it soon.
And also,
I mean, I could go through people who at Glacier View just betrayed Des, and it's very obvious from the documents. But, do I want to get to that level? Down the bottom is the thing that Des had done research. He wanted to bring the church to the gospel, and, they resisted it. And the reason they did is because Adventists have a heresy of justification, but they also have a heresy of sanctification. And I've been writing to John Rosier about that. I won't go into that. We might get onto it next week. So this is part of putting together stuff, and I'm very much waiting for things to drop in my lap, and it's amazing how they do as to how to put it together. But anyway, I've done about 375 pages of volume 3, and I want to make it exactly the same size as the other two.
Yeah.
Now, there's a lot of formatting, retyping, and proofing that has to be done. This will take a while, but it's going strong. And one thing I found in letters, which I may have said before, that letter that we read out from Neil Wilson, which is in volume 2, I found the answer from Des, which is 4 pages long. It's a very interesting document, what he says when he's put out. Yeah.
We might be able to have that in the next couple of weeks.
One of the amazing, well, it's in this, it'll come up.
It's in the series. Oh, good.
One of the amazing things he said, and he did say this in the Prexad meeting, he said to them, some of these ideas are already in the Bible commentary. I'll show you if you like. I remember him saying this. And they, look, I've talked about it as a war where there's bloodlust. If you've ever read about bloodlust, they were on a mission. They were really. But he says in this letter, he said, before Glacier View, I was compliant with Adventist document because of the Bible commentary and the work of Ray Cottrell. But he said, at Glacier View, it was reversed. And I think he says a number of other scholars, became uncompliant because they came up with the Dallas Statement and they actually went backwards. So that's interesting.
That was interesting. I think you alluded to that last week, and I remember thinking, wow. So
that letter's in here. It's 4 pages long.
Oh, good. Well, we will get to that in the next week or two.
That's 1983, so got a way to go.
I'm loving this.
Let's read the last letter.
So the second last letter, you're going to read Des to Keith, and then I'm going to finish with Keith to Des, and then we will come back next week with Neil Wilson to Des.
Okay.
I just noticed there, though, that's a big jump. We're going to be going from 79 to 83.
Well, we were only going to do one program. So that is the letter that we read last week.
Yeah, so maybe give me an updated, and we'll throw a few others in there just so we get a bit of 80, 81, 82 in there.
Let's do these first. And
then we'll do these, and then we can look at that.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
January the 4th, 1979. So this is 3 months after the letter telling, no, 2 months after writing the last letter, telling Parmenter off politely, Dear Keith, thank you for your letter received this afternoon. I hasten to comment before leaving for San Diego for weekend
Can I just
meeting.
interrupt there? So Keith wrote back after Des's January 4 letter, and this is now a reply to that.
Yes, and I don't have all the letters, you see.
Yeah.
So
That's all right. We can.
it's all dependent on Des's great filing, which was to throw it in the box. Crumpled, preferably. I had to flatten everything. He wasn't a great filer.
Well, it's lucky.
We're lucky to get what we've got.
Yes.
And as Des said to me, it's good job we're not both the same.
Oh, it would have all been gone.
I did a lot of hard work.
You're a good team. Okay. Sorry to interrupt. Start again.
Thank you for your letter received this afternoon. I hasten to comment before leaving for San Diego for weekend meetings. First, thank you for replying to Brother Jones as you've done. An administrator's task is a difficult and delicate one at all times. Leaving it with GC Biblical Research Committee is certainly the best idea. Don Neufeld, who is in that committee, believes just what I've stated in my thesis. That's his PhD thesis, he hasn't yet done, well, we're not up to Glacier View. And so does Ray Cottrell. That is, that 2 Thessalonians 2 has its main fulfillment in the future. Now, for some people, this will be, they won't know what it's about because it's Des's theological thing. But this is why he went to Manchester, and it's why he ended up at Glacier View. And to sort of explain it, now let me think. That went out of my head. Let's see if I can think of it again. And I got this out of reading stuff that Des wrote, and I thought it was a good summary that in about the 400 pages of Great Controversy, Ellen White expresses what the men in the church, her husband and the pioneers, believed about the investigative judgment. But when you get to about the 600s, she goes off on her own. And Des said to me, what she says in those pages about the hinderer or the restrainer, who is in 2 Thessalonians 2, and it's the restrainer, well, anyway, it's a text about the final Antichrist. We've always believed, that in the last days there will be, Satan will come and confuse many. So Ellen White speaks about this in the later pages in Great Controversy. And in my book, I've got a page of Des's Great Controversy book where he's got circles around it and lines, and always fascinated, did his homework. He was fascinated by what she said about the restrainer. And she was going off on her own. Des has never been able to find a source where she got this material from, but she doesn't agree with her husband or the pioneers. And so this is why he went off to Manchester, because he wanted to see what the scholars of the world said that would support Ellen White's ideas. And when he got his PhD, F.F. Bruce came out and said, if anybody asks you what your contribution to knowledge is, point to what was said on 2 Thessalonians 2. And he got it from Ellen White, but of course he couldn't quote her because this is a university level. But she had what he called a gestalt describing these things. And he said it was quite unique. This is one reason he so highly regarded Ellen White, because there are things that she didn't appear to borrow, or at least he doesn't know where she got them from. So here he's explaining it to Elder Parmenter. And the reason I put this letter in, even though it's a little bit above a lot of people's head, is to sort of explain that and to say that I don't think that the scholars ever really understood what Des was about in his Glacier View manuscript in dealing with this material. He was sort of doing what Ellen White said. There's lots of things we've got to unlearn, and there's things that we've got to learn. Future light. And Des was out searching for it. And it's never been really looked at. So this is why I've included it.
Good.
So my summary is not what Des actually said, but I think it's pretty right that Ellen White, in the early pages of Great Controversy, went with the men. And of course, she'd have to. But in the later pages, she's experimenting with her own ideas. This is what I believed anyway. So 2 Thessalonians 2 has its main fulfillment in the future. Because people like Doug Batchelor, when they talk about 1844 is the last prophetic date. It's the end of prophecy for Adventists. So Des is looking at the final last days. He says, Great Controversy, page 624, is chiefly responsible for my understanding of 2 Thessalonians 2. You will notice that the last line of the page actually uses the words of 2 Thessalonians 2:11, and then on page 625 goes on to speak of this false Christ of the very last days. In different places of earth, Satan, through his angels, will counterfeit our Lord, and thus be the Antichrist par excellence. As Alf as well pointed out, this is Jorgensen, in the article he first sent out, and that plus my original copy of the letter to Ken Bullock is as good a summary of the facts as any. Antichrist is clearly shown in 1 John to be a genus, meaning a species. Even now there are many antichrists, says the inspired apostle. 1. I in no way deny the positions we've always taken on Antichrist. I'm pointing out that Ellen White's prediction in Great Controversy 624 to 625 is a marvellous exegesis of 2 Thessalonians 2. Remember, she claims there's nothing in her writings not already in Scripture, and many Adventists have wondered where it was in Scripture that the counterfeit by Satan was foretold. Of course, my thesis was not written for church people, but it's a very careful exegesis of the scriptural passage without prior assumptions and prejudices. The fact that we in Ellen White have used 2 Thessalonians 2 for the papal Antichrist is no stranger than our use of Matthew 24 for AD 70, though its real and complete fulfillment was not then, but is yet future. Christ did not come in the clouds in AD 70 to gather his elect. Similarly, the entire picture of 2 Thessalonians 2 will only fit the final apostasy foretold in Great Controversy, page 624 to 625, yet future. Note, this does not make Ellen White or me a futurist, though we and you believe that prophecy has much to say about the future crisis of Revelation 13, which will involve wicked spirits working signs, as foretold both in that chapter and 2 Thessalonians 2. This prophecy speaks of the man of sin working with all power, pretended signs and wonders. The papacy never worked with all power. Supernatural manifestations, as in Revelation 13 and Revelation 16:14, are intended. Note also Great Controversy, page 553. Before the second advent of Christ, there will be similar manifestations of satanic power. The coming of the Lord is to be preceded by the working of Satan with all power and signs and lying wonders. 2 Thessalonians 2, 9, 10. Ellen White then links 2 Thessalonians with Revelation 13, 13, 14, which everybody acknowledges to be future. Does this make her a futurist? See also Great Controversy, 561, last paragraph. See next page, also quoting 2 Thessalonians 2. And this is a bit naughty. Cannot Brother Jones read? Or does he only read what pleases him? Please feel free to make use of this whatever. My position on prophecy is similar to that of Dr. Kenneth Strand of Andrews University and Ray Cottrell and Don Neufeld and others. See also Problems in Bible Translation on Isaiah 7:14 for the same principle of minor and major application. Only one application fulfills all the scripture. See also Great Controversy, pages 389 and 390, also on 2 Thessalonians 2, applying it to the future and to Satan himself, page 5592. Especially see page 593. Antichrist is to perform his marvelous works in our sight, and Contact says it is the prince of evil. Don't hesitate to send any specific questions. God bless and sustain you. Warmest regards from us both. And I think this letter is in my 3rd volume as well. There's one I overlooked, but when I read it, I realised this was the essence of what Des was trying to say, and it involves the apostolic principle that in Daniel 8, originally, the wicked little horn is Antiochus Epiphanes. That's who the Jews thought it was. But it's a prototype. It's not filling the whole thing full. Now, of course, Des gets accused of making Antiochus Epiphanes the interpretations, which he never did. He said we can maintain pagan Rome and papal Rome. We can keep what we have, but when we come to the end time, the Antichrist is not going to be just the Catholic Church. It might include the Catholic Church if the church becomes persecuting again. You know, this is a persecuting power. So this is what he's trying to say. I don't think the church got it at all. What Des was trying. It wasn't. It really wasn't that different. What he was trying to do was to say, look, the way we've expressed the 2 phases of atonement, the investigative judgment, is not right. Our scholars have known it for a long time. And the way we've expressed prophecy is not quite right. We can't do it by the dates. The dates are wrong. By and large, they're wrong. Or if they're not wrong, they come up with the wrong conclusion as to what they mean. But he said you can get the same idea using the apostolic principle, which is biblical. You can come up with the same idea of recurring prophecy, ending up with a final Antichrist. So you can save Adventism as scriptural without the errors of the dates and the investigative judgment. I don't know whether I've expressed that very well. That's my best attempt.
No, very, very well said. Just checking here. Someone else has written. Oh, this is Andrew Skeggs, I believe. Des's letters show him to be a combination of theologian, poet, and evangelist. The turn of phrase is so entertaining. That's true. He's a very gifted writer.
It's like when
Thanks,
Parmenter
Andrew.
writes his farewell letters in 1983. I don't know whether I've got this here. I might have. I don't think so, because I had to choose what I was going to put on. But when he writes back to Parmenter and says, "Keep up the jogging."
Oh, I love it. It just popped into my mind when you and Des came down, and Elaine, for the those 2 programs that I ran in the Church in the Trees a couple of years before Des passed away. They're both on YouTube, and I think the morning message has over 8,000 or 9,000 views, and it's a pleasure to listen to Des in that, and you're with him as well, and just encourage people to go and check that out. It's a really, if you're interested in seeing how Des speaks with this kind of wit and intelligence, but a kind of a power there and authority, but also a beautiful calm within the storm, that particular live presentation is really amazing to behold, because he was like 86, I think, that weekend. Maybe we had a birthday cake for him.
He had a problem called, we didn't know it before he died, but Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, where it's an inherited disorder of collagen, and there's a number of different types. But you know, it has effects sort of on all the body, and he had to have surgery to have his teeth out, and his blood pressure, which was normally extremely low, with the anesthetic went very high. And the only reason I knew was that the nurse who took us to the door after the extraction said that his blood pressure was very high. These side comments were very, very handy later on. Anyway, he had a stroke, and he did that talk with you after the stroke. It's quite
That's right. Yeah. An achievement, isn't it?
He couldn't exercise.
Yeah.
So I bought him a wheelchair, and he used to, well, when he did walk, he didn't look like Des walking down the street. He was over to the side like this.
Right.
So I got him
Are you referring to the interviews I did when I came up to your house?
No.
Or the actual church one in the trees there?
Church one in the trees.
Right. He'd had the stroke before then.
Yeah.
Wow.
And
that makes those meetings even more amazing.
He so inspired the people who lived around there, because he kept exercising, and he actually ended up with this finger. He had damaged his hand from pushing the wheelchair, and couldn't get it to go down.
Right.
But he gradually got better, and he'd recovered. And the reason he accepted coming down was because he was about, within a month or two, to have the other teeth out.
Yeah.
And that one, he had a massive infection and was hospitalized and was delusional. He really went through a lot.
Yeah.
But it was just amazing to be able to do those talks down at
incredible.
the Church of the Trees. He still had it. He really worked until the end. Absolute inspiration. Yeah. My privilege to be close to him as he went downhill and eventually died. I've never, there was absolutely no bitterness. No. Well, and even though he didn't, in the end, he didn't make a lot of sense, because he'd had, after that, about 2 months before he died, he had a bad fall. He'd had a stroke. He tried to get up and fell. And he crawled through several rooms. And he'd had probably another stroke and a brain bleed. And but if somebody came in, he said to me that day, he said, "You're going to have to get help," he said, "because I can no longer organize my mind and I can't stand up."
Wow.
And anyway, I don't know what I was going to say about that, but after that, if you talked to him, it didn't always make much sense. But somebody came in and asked him a theological question. He could still answer it, and he understood everything I said. And interestingly, now Fleetwood Mac laughed at this, but he got quite distressed and went through the investigative judgment. Fleetwood Mac thought this was very funny. And I said to him, "Des," and it was over nothing. It was over nothing. He was so conscientious, so conscientious. I said to him, "Des, all your life you've preached that you don't get to heaven by your own works. You get to heaven because of Jesus." And then he was all right.
Thanks for those insights.
Well, I didn't plan to say that.
No, it was lovely. Important.
He wouldn't be surprised that I was doing this.
No.
He was already pleased with me. I think he'd be very pleased with this, because to me I'm trying to give our view of what happened.
Yeah. In a time period that back then you couldn't have done. Like social media affords us a platform that the powers that be can't just make a statement and then those who hear it have to kind of agree or disagree or share tapes or letters, or this is kind of an immediate sort of platform that can reveal truths unlike any other time period. So you were born at the
You,
right
you
time.
can, you can sort of understand when you read the letters, you can have sympathy, which Des did for the administrators. He said to them, even at Glacier View, he said to them, look, I'd probably do what you're doing. I understand your difficult position. Murdoch, who was his Bible teacher at Avondale and then the dean at Andrews, told his granddaughter, a big ship can't suddenly turn around in the ocean. And, you know, it's undoing what we thought. And, of course, not everybody agreed with him. But they certainly have not changed at all in the last 42 years.
Okay.
In fact, yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
That's all right. I was talking to you this morning about Spectrum just said that Bill Knott has resigned, and there's a thought that even though he's got future plans, that it's going to be used as an opportunity to make the church more conservative.
Yeah.
So batten down the hatches.
Ted Wilson is in power. The predicted changes are happening, and they will trickle down.
You see, I thought because I went to uni, I mixed with a lot of bright people, and I'd mixed with a lot of the people who said that Des was not very bright. Like Spangler said it to his face, you're not a very good scholar. And a lot of the scholars said that Des wasn't a very good scholar. Well,
I think they said it in a way to defend themselves for their silence.
Well, who knows? We can't read people's motives, but I've never, when I went to uni, I did a master's, and you do all sorts of, a variety of subjects. Whatever I did, by the time I'd finished, Des knew more about the subject than I did by the time I'd actually written the paper. He was phenomenally well-read and knowledgeable. He read 5 hours a day from his childhood.
Amazing.
And after a certain years, it was all, he really researched things thoroughly. If he spoke about it, he'd done his homework.
He had an inquiring mind and a good memory.
But to live with him and he was a very smart man.
Where did Spangler say that? In writing, or did you say to his face?
No. What happened, this was after Glacier View. It was probably in about 1982, but I'm not sure. But Spangler came over, and of course he was a personal friend. And he told us that he was going to be up at Tahoe. So we went up there and met with him. And he sneered at Des. I thought, not very Christian. See, I'm sitting there, I'm watching all this. Oh, he said, you're not much of a scholar.
Was he being tongue-in-cheek?
No.
Wow. We've got a comment I'll just quickly put up before I finish off today's program with Keith to Des. People who knew Dr. Ford could not help but see him as inspirational. Imagine the dedication to go to Manchester University to understand the text in the New Testament, that text being central to his understanding imputed righteousness. Imputed righteousness. And that was Brian Beeden, thank you. And Moto Sapien, Desmond's position about Glacier View is extremely interesting. Maxwell echoes that same sentiment in parents sending their kids and money to SDA universities and kids coming back with crazy ideas. Not sure exactly.
Well, because
bringing some of these up out of sync, I guess. Because of
Oh, well, it's probably not who I thought. You certainly come over as much more rational than the person I'm thinking of.
As an aside, I wonder who Gillian thinks I am. Truly, I'm a nobody from Nevada. And we value
I used
your
to live near
input.
you.
We value your input, Moto Sapien. And Ree, your last comment, I'm I'm getting messages, sometimes a bit delayed, so I'm not sure exactly where that was, what you were referring to. But thank you. Okay,
somebody's mentioned Maxwell quite a bit, and of course, your friend and mine, Joe.
That's who I was thinking for a
he
second
brings
there
up.
too.
I don't think so. Oh, he's working in Tahoe right now. Right. We lived in Auburn, California, for for many years.
Yeah,
So knew Tahoe very well.
that's who I thought it was too. Moto Sapien, reveal yourself to me in a private message. I will keep your identity secret. Okay, we're going to finish today with reading this Keith Parmenter to Des, dated September 6, 1979.
Oh,
This
yeah,
is
this is important.
only a month before the famous October
You'll see
27 Forum, 1979.
You'll see that Des took it right to heart and then did the forum next month.
Yes, brilliant. That was his reply. I encourage everyone to go this week to next week to go and listen to October 27 Forum meeting, Des Ford, October 27, 1979. Someone might put it in the links. You might be able to put it in the links for us, Gillian. We should all listen to it before the next meeting, because that's his reply, in a way.
Oh, right.
We're reading letters backwards and forwards. Okay, here we go. Dr. D. Ford. Dear Des, thank you for your 2 letters, August 15 and 27. I've been out of the office quite a bit lately, having visited the Central Pacific area for 3 weeks, and then after only being home for a week or so, going off again for 2 weeks in New Zealand. It's interesting, he's always talking about how busy he is as a bit of an excuse for not totally getting back fast enough. Where was I? A week or so, going off again for 2 weeks in New Zealand. Just a little over 2 weeks from now, Brother Butler, Brother McFarland, and I will be heading over to North America for the annual meetings of the General Conference. Brother Judd will be joining us a little later. I understand that you are coming to Washington for the meeting that Elder Wilson has called on the subject of the plan of redemption. And you've put a little comment here, suggests that Des was present at the October 3 to 4, 1979 Righteous by Faith meeting, 3 weeks before the PUC forum meeting.
See, Des used to go to the airport and he'd look at the tickets to find out where he was going. He was away so much. But this is the only evidence, because I've looked at the actual meeting, that tells me that Des was actually at those meetings. I wondered if he was.
Right.
But he was.
I would hope, for the sake of the church, Des, that we will be able to agree on a statement that can go out to our people that will settle the confusion that seems to be in the minds of so many today. I believe the statement needs to be written in language and theological terms that the people in our pews can understand. As pastors of the flock, we have a very definite responsibility to present this message in a clear, concise, and balanced way, so that no one will be lost for the kingdom because of our influence or preaching. And that's what, in a way, I was saying. Des's reply in the live forum meeting was very much for the people and did outline where Des was coming from. It was his statement to the people that was able to settle the confusion. Back to the letter. I had heard a couple of months ago from one of Robert Brinsmead's relatives that he was working on a manuscript on the 1844 movement. The message that came through to us indicated that there was some division, even amongst the Brinsmead group, over the stand that he was about to take. This was
so my point here is, if this was not John Brinsmead, who was it?
Yes,
because the Parmenter
even
family
amongst
wrote
the Brinsmead group,
they denied this action.
There are some of his followers who feel that he's inclined to make the 1844 movement a non-event and destroy the influence of the spirit of prophecy. See, that's interesting.
That's 1844 re-examined, and it came out in summer 1979.
Yeah.
which
leadership,
was quite independent of. We didn't know about it. I mean, Des would have got a copy later,
yeah,
but Des had nothing to do with that. But
yeah,
it was just one of these happenstance things
yeah,
before, and you have to see the providence of what happened.
yeah.
We did. We always saw it.
One of the questions I would ask a lot of the people I interviewed in season 2 was, how relevant did they feel the 1844 message was as a supernatural event occurring in the heavens, if it happened, if it was relevant, etc. And many, including Bill Johnson, when I asked, could you be a good Adventist and not believe in the investigative judgment? And he was, of course. But the leaders at that time, when would have known that the academics and pastors at the time would have known that the leaders at that time were thinking this, that some felt that Bob Brinsmead and others were inclined to make the 1844 movement a non-event and therefore destroy the influence of the spirit of prophecy. And that was what they were really trying to not allow to happen, to
So
damage
that's not
the
the letter,
authority.
though.
No. What I mean is, well, he said that in the letter just now, and what he's saying is that people don't want to destroy the influence of the spirit of prophecy. And I'm saying that a lot of the people in the season 2 actually did feel that the investigative judgment teaching was wrong, but you could still be an Adventist, no problems. And I'm just saying that back in the day, that they would have been kicked out of the church for saying that. Back to the letter. A copy of his manuscript was placed in my hands yesterday. I guess it is possible that you already have this manuscript, which is entitled 1844 Re-Examined. I will enclose a copy of the first 7 pages, so that you will be aware of the areas covered in the manuscript. I've not had opportunity to read it as yet, for it contains 179 pages. I have so many meetings to care for in the next couple of weeks before I leave for the States, and I may not have the opportunity of going through it thoroughly before I leave. But Brother Jorgensen has a copy, and he expects to be able to report to me before I leave. You are aware, Des, that your name is constantly being linked with Robert Brinsmead and Paxton. I think this is most unfortunate, for it does damage your influence with a number of those who have fought the Brinsmead movement over the years. I would not want to judge Robert Brinsmead and Paxton too harshly, but I would have to say that his movement has been the most subtle thing the church has had to face over the years. That's true. I know that he promised a number of our leaders that he would not war against the church any further, but I believe the day may not be too far away when there will be a real confrontation with Robert Brinsmead and his followers. While Robert Brinsmead may be a little closer to Adventist teaching on a number of points these days, I think it is fairly obvious still that he has little regard for properly constituted church organisation. A number of folks have said to me recently that Des Ford will soon need to declare publicly just where he stands as far as Brinsmead and Paxton are concerned. I know, Des, what you have told me personally, but there are still a number of folks who are wondering where you stand and if Robert Brinsmead is promoting your thesis and can gain any support from you from his manuscript. It will be easy for folk to conclude that you are in his camp. I believe that you can easily correct this by making a clear and forthright statement just as to where you stand as far as Robert Brinsmead is concerned. You might get the opportunity to do this in one of the articles that you write for the Review or the Record sometime. There are a number of our young ministers and even of our people who claim that the only reason that Robert Brinsmead is not accepted back into the church is that we as a church feel that he is doing such a good work for the publishing of his magazine that it is better for him to remain as a non-member. Whether Robert or some of his followers are responsible for this kind of a story or not, I would not be in a position to judge. I think the leaders were responsible for the story. Anyway, you mentioned that Dr. Castle had spoken to you about the possibility of a short holiday in Australia. when it was arranged for you to stay on at PUC for an extra 2 years, we discussed the possibility of a little vacation for you and your wife back in your homeland. 2 or 3 months ago, I spoke to Eric Magnuson about it and told him that as far as the division officers were concerned, that we were clear on the suggestion that he could convey this message to you through Dr. Castle. I appreciate your attitude in not wanting to cause any more expense than necessary, and we can talk a little further about this when we see you in Washington. The evangelistic efforts conducted by John Carter and Jeff Youlden in Melbourne and Perth are going along very nicely. It looks as though both men are going to have good harvests of souls this year. In fact, reports coming in to us would indicate that 1979 could be a record year for baptisms in the division. One never knows, of course, until the final count is made. Well, I must not stay to write further. I do trust that you, Jill, and your family are keeping well. With warm personal greetings, Keith. Some thoughts in closing today's part 1.
Well, I do think, I think the letters are reasonable and a lot of people would have agreed with them. It all depends on your point of view. But anyway, I've turned that one down. I think we've said enough about it. But he's already got this idea. You should write in one of your articles, especially where you stand about Bob Brinsmead.
Hint.
And this is what came up in the Friday afternoon. It was a thing that Des was not going to damn Brinsmead. It's a key reason that he didn't survive the Friday afternoon. That was one of the requirements. But the other one was that he had to preach according to the Dallas Statement, which had come out in April, which was the traditional view, and that it wasn't enough to keep quiet about his ideas. He actually had to change his mind. Well, they were two things that Des couldn't do.
Yeah.
When he said to Parmet, you want me to lie about it? And he said, no. He said, but if you can't do that, then I shouldn't have to ask you for your credentials. You should hand them to me. And that's just the way they saw it. That was the issue. They determined that Des was going to be judged by the Dallas Statement. And whatever arguments he put in his manuscript, they written, and whatever conclusions the consensus came up with, which was to go towards Des's position in about 12 areas, some of which they hadn't published before, and 7 of them were absolutely key. The consensus statement went towards Des's position, but they didn't use it. And they didn't, I can testify, I was there. They did not realize that there was a difference between the Dallas Statement, number 23, and the consensus statement. And I felt as I sat there, they're like the disciples. They don't understand. That's how I...
Yeah. What an interesting era within Adventism, and you were there front row and center, contributing and being a part of it. And I really value you taking the time today, and everyone is just super pleased that you are putting out this material, that you're keeping your and Des's legacy alive and well. One more quick plug. Gillian's latest works are available on Amazon, and they're called On the Way to Glacier View Volume 1 and 2. Volume 3 is coming. I've written soon, but only wishful thinking. And just check if there's some messages here that we need to read before we say farewell.
Another question come in. I don't know quite what it means.
Was Keith Parmenter asking Des Ford, a scholar, to conduct an ad hominem on Robert Brinsmead? Yes, I think he was.
See, and Des said to them, look,
he wanted to attack Bob, but also I think he wanted people would have taken, if Des had disagreed with Bob, that would have weakened Bob's not attack, but Bob's dissent on the church.
Well, Des said to them,
Good.
while Des is preaching the gospel, while Bob is
Good question.
preaching the gospel, I will not oppose, a Christian ministerial brother.
Mm.
And he just wouldn't
And in
ever
many
consider it. And
ways,
they couldn't understand that he wouldn't do it, because, see, if you're political, you might do that, but Des wouldn't do that. He wouldn't do it. And actually, that letter that I'm going to read next time, in response to the 1983 letter that we've already read out, but we might do it again. Des said, I'm not going to. He says quite clearly, I won't advance my position by damning somebody else. He just wouldn't do it.
yeah, good on him. Good on him. The Adventist church leadership wants to control your mind. They always have and they always will. Okay, well, look, just a quick reminder, if people can click that subscribe button and the like button, you have no idea how much that really helps with the algorithms. Please consider subscribing to our YouTube channel. I need to have 1,000 members by Christmas. That's the aim. And a lot of people say, you must spend a lot of time doing SDAQ&A, and it's true, and I love it. But if you'd like to support my work, which is hours a week, it's fast becoming my main focus, actually. Here's a way to contribute and support what I do. PayPal.me/Peter Dixon Music. Really appreciate that. And as a thank you, Gillian, you might even like to download this yourself. If people go to this site, I'm putting one of my songs there for free. It's a song called Never Be the Same. And just go to, if you type in peterdixon.gumroad.com, click a button and it'll be downloaded on your computer for free. Oh, and yes, a plug for the beautiful garden of Gillian Ford.
Now, this is a hibiscus that hasn't been out for about 8 months, and one came on, and today it fell off. So I thought I'll bring it and show it to you.
It's beautiful. Incredible. Well, thank you, Gillian, for your time. Let's do it again next week. We'll do a part 2. I'll be chatting to John Rosier. Part 2 of this reading of the letters.
Oh, right.
We've got so many different parts of our conversations. I try and make them come in different chunks. So part 2 of our letter reading series. Hopefully John Rosier Monday night. I'll chat to John. And don't forget I've just got to quickly check, Wednesday, the Naked Pastor, David Hayward. Wednesday, 9:30 a.m. So I'll be getting up early for that one. Thank you, Gillian. And until next time, have a great week. Thank you, everyone, for watching.
Yes, thank you, everybody.